Hello, and welcome to this presentation on initial and final consonants, which is the very first topic that you have in the pronunciation section of your course booklets on page 127. Today, we're going to look at some of the most important concepts in this material, which I hope you read after you have watched the video. In this presentation, we will go over three main concepts, that is, aspiration, the alveolar flap, and some special features that final sounds are going to show from now on. We all know that sounds are rarely produced in isolation. Whenever we speak, we join a lot of sounds, and so each one of these sounds will happen in context. Because of this, sounds are influenced by the environment in which they occur. That is, they will vary their pronunciation according to the position within a word and the sounds that come before or after. This concept is called positional variation, or more specifically, as explained by Folks in 2020, the tendency of a phoneme to be articulated differently in different positions or environments. For example, at the beginning of the words pig and big. In both of these words, we have a labiodental stop. But when you produce the word pig, you can notice there's more strength or more air coming out. Whereas when you produce the word big, there is not so much air coming out of your mouth. And this is what we call aspiration. That is, the pronunciation of a consonant with an aha sound, or, putting it another way, with the sound of escaping air. For example, this is the feature that we have at the beginning of the words pig, ten, and caught. Another way to define this concept is that definition provided by Encyclopedia Britannica, which I checked a couple of months ago when creating this presentation for you. That is, an accompanying forceful expulsion of air. Now, the rule that governs this aspiration phenomenon is one that you may have already studied in previous courses, but you have focused only on three sounds, the apa, a ta, and a ka sounds, as the image shows you. However, our new definition includes all voiceless consonants. The rule that we have in your course booklet states that these voiceless consonants are aspirated at the beginning of a, and look at this word, monosyllabic word. When we have a voiceless consonant sound at the beginning of a one-syllable word, that voiceless consonant will be aspirated. But wait a minute, how do we represent aspiration phonetically? You may already know, and if you didn't, you may have already inferred that the IPA diacritic for aspiration is a superscript H, which, as you can see in these examples, is placed immediately after the aspirated sound. That is the small h that you can see in turn, people, and counter. And that is going to be the symbol that we will use from now on to indicate aspiration. And so, the rule that we have in the course booklet, a little bit modified, is the first one that you can see in this slide. All voiceless consonants are aspirated at the beginning of a monosyllabic word. For example, the initial sounds in the words pay, teach, care, thought, chose, feel, and system. However, voiceless consonants can also be aspirated in medial position. When does this happen? Well, when they are at the beginning of the stressed syllable. Look at the examples that show this. Contain, education, cathedral, exchange, confuse, and achieve. The bold-faced letters are those whose sounds are going to be aspirated. And as you can see, they are all the first sound in the stressed syllable. But professor, we also have as beginning words. Does this happen with them as well? No. The voiceless consonant after S is not going to be aspirated because the asa sound has already used a lot of that energy which I needed to expel this additional amount of air. So the apa, ata, and aka sounds after the S in the words speak, state, and scarce are not going to be aspirated. But wait, there is also the case of words that have one of these stop voiceless sounds but are followed by another consonant. Well, if that second consonant is an approximant, that is the ara sound or the Allah sound, as well as the glides awa and aya, then this second consonant will be pronounced voicelessly as well. Why? Because the plosives release will somehow absorb and coincide with the approximant, and so both sounds will become voiceless. And how do you represent this voicelessness that the R or the L or the awa or the aya sounds will now have? Well, by introducing this small empty circle below the letter that belongs to that sound. That small circle indicates that that sound, which is usually voiced, is now going to be voiceless. Now, this is then what we can see in um, Betty Butter's butter, which shows you another feature of certain sounds whose pronunciation is going to change a little because of the environment in which they happen or occur. If you practice or if you have seen and read aloud this text, you will have noticed that there are a lot of letters T, but not all of them are actually aspirated. We don't really say Betty Butter bought some butter. Actually, in American English, these lines are produced differently. Betty Butter bought some butter. As you can see, all the letters T that we have are pronounced differently. Some of them are pronounced very quickly, as in Betty, butter, bowder, batter, and better. This specific sound is what we call the flap. And this happens when we have certain conditions being met. Now, this sound, the alveolar flap, is also called the tap. And as you can see in the IPA, this alveolar flap will be represented by this symbol over here. When does this happen? Well, this ara sound, which is the alveolar flap, needs to occur between voiced sounds, which, as you know, may include vowels, and even the retroflex ara. Now, to occur, the alveolar flap should also happen after a stressed syllable. For example, atom and atom, which are pronounced in the same way, if you noticed. It should also be the first sound of an unstressed syllable. it may happen between words. For example, not at all, nota, and at all. And it can also happen between a vowel sound and what we call a dark L, which is an L that behaves as a syllable. For example, the words little and riddle. However, remember that the alveolar flap will never happen at the beginning of a stressed syllable. Now, how do we produce this sound? This is a sound that we also have in Spanish, so it shouldn't be a problem for you to produce it. How do you describe how to produce it? Well, you do it by saying this. It is a quick flap of the tongue against the tooth ridge with your vocal cords vibrating. This sound came to be because it is a simplification of a more complex and more energy consuming sound. And as you know, sounds in any language will evolve so that they are produced in the most simple way, which is also the laziest way. Now, if you want to have a visual representation of what happens, you can see that the position between these two sounds is very similar. However, when you produce a word such as hotel, the tongue is going to touch the alveolar ridge and stay there for longer so that there is a puff of air being released. However, when you produce the flap, then a word such as water, then the ara sound implies that the tongue is also going to touch the alveolar ridge, but very quickly, super fast, so that the air cannot be expelled in such a strong manner. Instead, there is a voiced sound being released, water. Now, in the past, you may have seen that some books and some booklets used to or use this symbol over here. This is the symbol that was used some years ago. There are actually still some professors that use it because that's the symbol they are used to. However, the new IPA version, which was released maybe 10 years ago, changed that. And the new symbol that represents the alveolar flap is this one, which you can see here on the right. So remember, the flap or the tap is a very quick sound, and it will always happen between voiced sounds and at the beginning of a unstressed syllable. That is, it happens before unstressed syllables, right? And there are some special cases, some additional information I thought might be interesting. For example, the consonant before unstressed syllables, the consonant sound ana and the consonant sequence nt can both be realized as a nasalized flap. And that is why the words winner and winner may sound the same sometimes. Same thing with the words banner and banner. For some Americans, this is very common. How can you tell which one you are listening to? The context will let you know. And if you feel uncomfortable uh, while nasalizing these sounds, you can always say winter and banter, and that will be okay. This Native American English phenomenon may have another name, that is, the disappearing T. And it is particularly common when words with this medial NT sound occur in some phrases, such as 21, winter break, entertainment business, and we can also see it in some names of places. For example, Toronto. So again, this disappearing T phenomenon is also very common. Now, I have just noticed I say now a lot, right? How do we pronounce stops? Let's just recall how it is that we produce them. First, we close the airflow and then we release the air very quickly and very strongly. So, if I asked you, in which of these two steps does aspiration occur? I bet you will be right when you said that it happens during the second step. Which step do American English speakers normally skip in final stops? That second step. Look at words such as stop or skip. You don't actually listen to people saying stop and skip, right? So, this second step, the release of air, is actually skipped when we have one of these sounds at the end of a word. Therefore, you might be wondering, how can one tell if the final sound is voiced or voiceless then if I can't listen to it? In that case, we need what we call lengthening. For example, if I say I heard a buzz versus I heard a bus, you will notice that first, one of these words ends with a final voiced sound, the first one, buzz, while the means of transportation ends with a voiceless continuant, bus. One of these two words will have a longer vowel sound, and that is going to be the word which ends with a voiced consonant, buzz. The means of transportation, however, bus, is not going to have that lengthened vowel. That is because it ends in a voiceless consonant, which is actually going to be lengthened or aspirated, and thus we can see the small superscript h. So, this is the rule. Before a final voiced consonant, stressed vowels are lengthened. And as you could see in the example, that is the symbol that we are going to use to indicate that a vowel sound is going to be produced for a little bit longer. Also, look at this. At the end of a word, voiceless continuants, and look at this, th, are aspirated, but voiceless stops are not. That is why in the previous slide, the word bus has this aspiration symbol next to the S, since this is a voiceless continuant. Same thing will happen with other words that also end in voiceless continuant sounds, such as the first column, safe, place, teeth, and rich. Notice that I expel more air as I am pronouncing these last sounds, whereas their counterparts in the second column will actually have a longer vowel sound when I say save, plays, teeth, and reg. All of these words end in continuant consonants. However, if we have words that end in a stop consonant, aspiration is not going to happen, as in lack, rep, and det. But lengthening will take place. For example, lag, rib, and dead. What about stops at the end of words then? What happens? Well, we already mentioned this. If we have a plosive or a stop, remember both terms are synonyms. If we have a plosive at the end of a word, then that plosive is not going to be released, which means that we are going to close the airflow, but we are not going to release the air. This is what the image in here represents. Then, when we have a stop at the end of a word, let's say we are only going to produce half a stop, and thus we must avoid any finishing sound that we might want to add for emphasis. And when this happens, when we have a stop that is not being released, then we need to indicate this feature by using the corner quote unquote diacritic, which you can see here at the end of the word cat. Now, the absence of a release is even more obvious in compound words. For example, the word catnip. Here, the tongue tip touches the alveolar ridge at the beginning of the ata sound, and it stays there. It does so all the way through the end of the ana sound. So we say catnip, catnip. We don't say catnip, catnip. It sounds very, very exaggerated, and it is not necessary. So, if we analyze the word potato, and I asked you, why isn't the apa sound aspirated? The answer is because it is not at the beginning of the stressed syllable, and this is a multisyllable word. So, if there is any sound aspirated here, it is the ta sound in the middle, the one that is first. This ta sound is aspirated because it is at the beginning of the stressed syllable. The second T is not aspirated. Actually, it is flapped. And it is the alveolar flap because it happens after the stressed syllable, before or at the beginning of an unstressed syllable, and in between voiced sounds. So, last but not least, we are all Spanish speakers, so what problem could we encounter when pronouncing these initial aspirated consonants? Well, we don't have aspiration in Spanish, and so we may not aspirate initial voiceless consonants. And this is what translates into our foreign accent. I wanted to show you some clips on audio, but I couldn't find any that actually showed how this happens. However, I'm pretty sure you may see every now and then a Latin American who has lived in the US for a while and then adopts or embraces this feature and then takes it to their Spanish speech. And so we hear people saying, te quiero mucho. That is aspiration in Spanish, which of course sounds a little bit weird. So, how do we represent these differences? For example, between the words bus, the first one that you have there, and buzz. We use the symbols minus and plus. We use the symbol minus when we don't have that feature, but we use the symbol plus when we do have it. For example, the first word, the one that indicates that means of transportation, does not have voicing at the end. Its vowel, therefore, is not lengthened, but it does have aspiration at the end. The word buzz, on the other hand, has a voiced final sound, which means that its vowel will be lengthened. However, the final sound is not going to be aspirated because it is voiced. These are some of the sources that I used to create this presentation, including the images and some of the graphs. I hope that this presentation was useful and that when you read the information, which goes from page 127 to page 129, you can make sense out of what it says. Thank you. Bye.